Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This morning's session will be taking place in a few moments. Our speakers will be taking Q&A after, so please feel free to come over to the microphone. This session is being recorded, so please have the questions come to the mic so we can hear it live after. Thank you, and now over to our speakers.
Good morning. Okay, double check. Good morning. I'm Al Dianic. Thanks to everybody who's braved the morning cold to come out here. We want to talk to you about kind of what we're doing in the area of application programming interfaces, which we think are great. Some people think it's really boring. I think it's great. So if you're here, you probably think it's great also. What I wanted to do is just kind of quickly go through some of the background of why we're doing what we're doing, and then the technology approach, and then the path forward. So with me is Mr. Tim Stark, and he's my lead engineer on this activity. And if you dial into or you join the API community working group calls, you'll hear his voice a lot, and you'll see a lot of communications from him. So, okay. All right, so just briefly, since we're from DoD and there has to be an org chart in every deck, we sort of started this about 3 years ago. There's an effort within DoD called the Software Modernization Senior Steering Group, and it's a number of senior executives and from department across the services and OSD that they're really looking at implementing a lot of the recommendations for the software modernization studies from 2018 and 2019, and then the subsequent legislation. So, out of that activity, our colleagues in ANS, Mr. Sean Brady, had this notion that we need to sort of drive an acquisition towards having APIs as a requirement. Which, for anybody who's developed in a department, you know that that's really not how it's done, right? Everything's done based on almost a binary level ICD. It's not discoverable, not expandable very well, right? So we started to work partnering up on that, and we ended up the next year splitting into two kind of efforts, collaborative efforts. One on acquisition, right? How do you buy it? Which I've told Sean is the much harder problem in the department, is how do you buy things? And then the technology side of it from our side, which is, what are the recommended approaches? And there are some challenges in DoD, right? For implement, you can't just implement any technology you want to, so much as we might want to. But there are a lot of great examples in industry. So how do we work through that to help to define a path forward for the technological implementation that also meets the DoD's needs in terms of security and resiliency and safety. What we did is we formed a couple of different groups, and we meet actively. We have been meeting, and we've published. We'll kind of go through the history of that. We've published two versions of the guide. We're about to publish the third version here, probably within the next week. It's just going through final edit. It'll be uploaded to the CTO website probably almost any day now, and then there'll be a LinkedIn release kind of announcing it. So keep an eye out for that, and you can get a copy, or you can drop off a card, and I'll make sure that we email you a copy of the next guide. And we're already working on the next version beyond that. It'll be out probably midsummer, maybe by September. So we're trying to keep the content live rather than these sort of stale kind of DoD documents that you see. They're in PDF. Some of them are in stone tablets, right? They're kind of old enough that. So we want to keep that content live, and so we've gone to providing guidance that we can push out quickly. So we have multiple working groups, and so of course our challenge in interoperability is increasingly as industry has gone to decentralized or broad computing capabilities, right? The cloud, as we all know it. DoD has been much slower to do that. The IC has done a better job. When I was in the IC and we had the C2S transition and now C2E, there was a lot of progress made in how to use the cloud to move your mission outside of sort of the desktop, right, or a server room. So DoD is moving forward with that. CIO has done a great job of moving some new cloud vehicles into place so that we can start to use them. So now it's really, how do you enable the use of that? Because APIs really are kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum from the traditional way of connecting two cans with a piece of string and having a binary level interface that's point to point, which is how a lot of systems have been done. So how do we do that in an API environment where we're communicating across various enclaves or between various services? How do we make that data discoverable? consumable? How do we make sure that it's got the correct security? So those are things that we're working on from a technology standpoint. And of course, ANS is working towards moving forward with having APIs kind of in the next update to the software pathway guidance. API strategies will be required, so that as you enter the pathway, there'll be a requirement to explicitly describe how you're going to approach using APIs via sort of point-to-point interfaces. So a lot of good progress. Okay, so I'll start off with this and I'll hand it off to my colleague, but for those, again, familiar with DoD, there are a lot of ways, both legitimate and somewhat less legitimate, say, that to sort of hold up data. Some of it is siloing, organizational siloing, sapping, which legitimately there are security constraints on how our data can be used and where it can be stored and how it can be accessed. There's a number of other kinds of barriers. There's technology coupling that makes it very difficult to move data around. And as a couple of us were discussing this morning, we're kind of in the age where software is more the commodity and data is the gold, right? Data is the oil. So how do you make that available? We'll also, Tim will talk later a bit about our focus there. AI certainly is a data consuming, entity, right? You're going to have a lot of it. How do we make that available? It's not going to be by, sending PDFs around. It's not going to be by sending, CSVs around or some of the clunky ways we've done things. It's going to have to be done in a more adaptive way. So anyway, what I'd like to do now is kind of turn this over to Tim Stark, my colleague. Tim?
Oh. Thank you, Alan. All right, so I haven't had as much caffeine as Alan, so sorry about that. And usually I stand up, so I think you're more excited when you stand up and you present, but I'll give this a try. Go to the next slide. See if I can figure out how to work this.
The right arrow.
There we go. There we go. Okay, so one of the problems that we recognized early on was that you can't do a big bang on API conversion for these legacy systems. I worked on an ACAT 1D, and I'm sure you all are familiar with those large programs. And they're made up of, a lot of them are monolithic, but even the monolithic applications, there's many of them and many moving parts within them. So one thing that we kind of thought of, and I worked on a project that did this, was to take a legacy system and leverage APIs to modernize it. Something called the Strangler pattern is a pattern that you can use, and that's what we did in my work that I did in the Pacific JITC. And we took ACAT 1D, TMIP-J, which is DHA's theater medical program, and we modernized that. So basically, we need to figure out a way to leverage APIs to incrementally replace or add new functionality or features, and then APIs can be used to move, these legacy and monolithic capabilities to a modern-based UI. So that's the other thing too, is that a lot of these monoliths are, hard-coded applications where you have to have the, they have to be installed on a computer, and you have to run it on the computer as an application where, the modern applications are now mostly web app. And so that's one way we can move in that direction. So let's see, next slide. I'm used to saying next slide, not, okay. So we recently did a reliability talk at the RAMS convention earlier this year. And one of the things we wanted to include here was a reliability slide. We think, I tell the reliability guys, I meet with them and I say, well, we're using DevSecOps and, it's got zero trust. I go through all the things it has and they just kind of give me a blank look. So hopefully this is meaningful to you all. But, one of the things we recommend is that you use DevSecOps, use software factories. And with the software factories, you can develop these reliable design patterns, standardized components, and methodologies that you can, integrate into your system. I know we work with the various software factories like the Army Software Factory, and that's what they're doing. They've chosen their ecosystem and their process and their UI approach, and everything they do is like a cookie cutter that they produce out of that, and it makes it very easy and rapid for deployment. The other thing is obviously microservices architecture, which is kind of synonymous with API. And you need to collect metrics on ops, management, and governance to inform that process moving forward. As far as the next one, as far as SDKs, this is kind of, I've had people yell at me, write Alan nasty emails about this, but that they don't need SDKs, that their guys are top notch, they can do it without SDKs. But we really look at SDKs as a way to provide documentation, code samples. You can have authentication tools, utilities, testing tools. There's all kinds of things you can wrap into your SDK to make it easier on the system that's being developed and the user that's using your API. Finally, you need to really establish an API governance. We see a lot of people where this is more of an afterthought, where it should probably be something you think of up front, and then you iterate over time as you're implementing your API. One thing we're looking at now with our next MVCR3, which is coming up, we're starting to work on that now, is we're talking about something called chaos engineering. And right now, we don't think DoD is really utilizing that approach. That's kind of what Netflix uses to ensure that when they go ahead and they just kill part of their network and they see if it can recover. So I think the DoD needs to kind of think about that, maybe for business systems, not weapon systems, but there is a place for it, we believe, inside the DoD, and they should consider that. And the other thing is reliability, and they really should be reliability-centric when they're creating their APIs and their governance to manage that.
Just to inject a little bit, just on the SDK discussion, I think that discussion that we had in a couple of cases indicates kind of the diverse community we have in DoD, right? We have folks who operate environments, as you might imagine, that have a high security boundary around them, and so they may feel like, well, why would I do that? I just know how to write using this. Well, not everybody's like that, right? And in some cases, you have organizations that need to consume each other's data and discover it. So it's kind of an indicator, right, that we have to deal with a lot of different cultural elements within the department that they're not wrong. They have sensitivities about how they deal with data, but also there's work to sort of get them comfortable. We've seen that in a lot of cases with particularly traditional things, right? Systems that we're modernizing now that say haven't been modernized for 40 years, and they're the last time they deployed software, it was deployed on a single purpose processor with no cores, where you could deterministically load everything and every instruction the exact same way. Well, those things aren't made anymore, right? You have to become comfortable with newer technology. So this helps sensitize us to the needs of the community and how we have to socialize this going forward, so that they become comfortable with it and then accept it, and then they'll advance it. So there are great discussions. Tim's really good at sort of wearing people down and getting them to see the truth. So.
Sure, I'll take that. All right, so the next thing we really thought of was that, we talk about APIs, and then all of a sudden we start drifting into data or AI. And the thing that we're thinking about is that they're really interconnected. You can't really talk about APIs without talking about AI or big data or some kind of data mesh or some kind of ecosystem like that. I was just reading LinkedIn yesterday after I read Nick's latest rant on security. If you guys know Nick Shalon. So after that, I read an article that said that this new company, they were doing AI, and they were doing something to their AI to modernize it. And they said because of that, their API traffic increased 73% on their site because the changes they made in their AI. So I don't think people think about it like that. And that's really something we really need to think about, is that, it's kind of an ecosystem between all these elements. And so I wanted to just also say that, for new developments, we're also looking future, for the future in our next release we're going to do. We're looking at something called a Model Context Protocol from Anthropic. A2A, it's a Google product they put out. ACP, which is Agent Communication Protocol. It's from it's IBM. I think I saw them somewhere here. They're part of that, but it's an open standard with BAI and IBM. And then there's a ton of recent articles that we've seen in the last approximately month or so talking about these things on YouTube and other, like Medium, if you know what that site is. So they're doing also another area they're looking at is a lot of people had started moving down APIs to leverage APIs to do agentic AI. So they're doing a lot of comparisons now to compare, can you combine MCP with A2A? And then, why do you need to use ACP? And basically, does it go along with any of the others? Because you can take these and you can kind of combine some of them, but some of them don't match. They replace the other one. So they're trying to find that medium of exactly what the combination is. And they're also doing a lot of performance comparisons, too, to look at like REST versus MCP. And in that comparison I saw, MCP was significantly faster, like 4 times faster than using REST direct. So we're looking at that. We have a lab. We have something called the R&E Sandbox, which is a research and engineering sandbox. And we're going to leverage that to create prototypes and demos for this as well. Okay. If Alan allows it. So, and we have new people we just hired on. So we just hired on new developers. So that's going to really help us out. So as far as the ecosystem goes, if you look in our work that we've done so far, our MVP and our MVCRs, they have this diagram. I think it came in the MVCR too. But this diagram you're looking at here is just a typical API ecosystem that we came up with. And I think it's actually been updated since this version that we have up here. So we have a newer version we'll release in the next iteration. But I think you really need to think about tailoring this to your needs and take this and use it as a starting point to try to figure out how you're going to do all these roles and manage all these capabilities when you're implementing your AI, in your ecosystem. So
one thing to add in, and when we look across in our organization, system engineering and architecture, we look across the entire sort of engineering ecosystem, and APIs have become kind of a big consideration in digital engineering, right? So when you look at the various tools, rather than being sort of locked into using a particular tool, say a Cameo or something, using their APIs to be able to interact with the data more directly rather than through the interface. And that's become a significant consideration for how we move forward with commercial tools, right, is to be able to look at. In fact, the SysML v2, if you're familiar with that, the APIs are sort of inherent to that new standard. That's going to be a driver. So that's one of the things that we think is going to be important across the board, not just sort of application-to-application communications. Sort of another example, something we did when we were in the IC, sort of enabled by cloud, was we were able to connect a requirements database. It was an operational tool to Cameo models and do analysis by mining through an API, right, OSLC, by mining things directly. And then using that to inject them into simulation tools. So you start to use your digital engineering environment as a database to be able to pull. Well, all that's API enabled, right? So some of it's going to be applications, commodity applications that the department has and uses, and then sort of the APIs will enable that interface to other kinds of uses to do more innovative things, right, more rapidly. So anyway, I thought that was. That's one of the things that when we kind of show this diagram, we want people to get the idea. It's not just software engineers trying to get 2 applications to talk. This is sort of how everything is done outside of the DoD, right? So, and again, I've told Sean Brady, the acquisition part's the hardest part. How do you buy that? How do you consume that? I know with the Department of Labor, they told us that as much as when they had their open data initiative and they released and made their APIs public, they sized their servers to be able to handle a certain load, and it was like double what they expected the first day. And so, I guess the IT folks were beating on their door, complaining to them about how this was crippling. Well, they had to add capacity. Well, this is the demand. The demand is out there once you open this up. So I think the department will have to consider that, and also the security aspects of how do you make sure that is, that those introduce vulnerabilities that we don't want. So, sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Oh, yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, just to pile on a little bit, we've been, for about the last year, we've been looking at modern approaches with APIs, and, Afro came out with this kind of concept of text to model, and they created a rough prototype to create, I forget what it was exactly, but they created, a multi-system model that was realistic, prototype level. But interesting, and we've taken that in our conceptual, talking back and forth in our group, and we want to take it a lot further than that. But the problem is we're held up right now because there's no APIs that we can leverage within the DoD to do this within, our CUI level and other, clearance level that we need to work in. So right now, we're just kind of held up on that, but we're going to move out on that as soon as we can once that's available. We're in talks with, the Nipper GPT, Camo GPT, and others, and they're just, they're starting out, but they're making good progress lately. So hopefully we'll get that up soon. Okay, so this is basically the front cover of our MVCR2, I believe, MVCR1. So we have our MVCR2. As Alan said, it's going to release in the next few days on the website. We did give final approval, saying it was good to go. So it's just a matter of the red tape of getting it on the website, getting it up and running. So we developed these documents in 6-month increments, and that was Alan's kind of guidance, that he wanted us to continue to develop them. The problem is that, I don't know if you guys have heard of DeepSeek or other, the latest stuff coming out with AI, but literally, like, DeepSeek came out on I think it was a Friday, and by Monday there was a new release that, from a similar, I think it was also a Chinese group, but it one-upped the DeepSeek. So the problem is, 3 days, a week, we're seeing these new releases every few, weeks at the minimum, and months, sometimes as well. But we really need to keep up and find a better way to get this documentation out and somewhere where it can be read and consumed quickly, versus the way we've always done business with these documents that take 2 to 3 years to finally publish, or else they're dead weight, paperweight by the time they come out. So we'll continue to iterate and evaluate feedback to support our next updates. And right now we have been working on it. Our MVCR3 has been in work since July of 2024, if you can believe that. And since then, just like I just said, about every month we decide, oh, no, let's not do that. Let's do this. And it's like something new every month. So it's continuously chasing our tail on that. So that's that. So let me go to the next slide. All right. So this is the SecDef memo that came out on March 6th. In there's talk about software pathway, to leverage software pathway, to leverage the commercial solutions openings, CSOs, and also other transaction authorities, ATOs. And we're looking at that as basically those items all kind of insinuate that you're going to leverage APIs. And their APIs are typically used to support a lot of these items, because some of them, some of these items are cloud-based and service-based. So you're going to leverage APIs. So we're really trying to align with that and make sure that we're supporting the memo. So,
yeah, one of the great things sometimes when you have a hard pivot and a direction from the boss. In the DoD, right, our boss, our commander's intent is everything. So our commander has said, get this done. And we've been kind of excited to see this, because sometimes it's hard to get adoption of sort of a newer method of deploying. And we think, the team between ANS and R&E has been, and the services that we've been working with have been well positioned to start to talk about APIs, because that will make this possible. As we have more vendors delivering software more rapidly, we could have, I've told people internally, if we have, let's say we have success, it doubles over the next year. You've got 100 programs all starting to deliver software, so you're going to have 100 deliveries in the next year, and then more frequently after that. So you can't do things the old way, and you can't do point-to-point data the old way. So we're really going to have to adopt these modern methods to sort of carry out the commander's intent of this. So I think we're pretty excited that this really drives, gives us the impetus to drive this modernization forward. So.
Sure, and I'll keep moving. I just noticed we're running a little short on time here. I'll try to.
We have till 9:15.
So this is our basically activities that are planned over the next. Well, the MVCR2 is now done, so that we can mark that out as released or close to released. And the MVCR3, like I said, we've been planning since July. We're going to be talking about that in our upcoming meetings. We have Friday meetings, 10 to 11. And we'll talk about that. The API catalog pilot, we're working with DLA, Defense Logistics Agency. They're supporting us on this, and we're using the Mirth Connect product and Mirth for that. We just happened to, that happened to be the ecosystem that they had established, and they put it into production. So we're going to be leveraging that. And the idea here is that, we see the CDAO, we see other people doing catalogs, but what we're trying to do is create a different type of catalog that's more modern, that allows when, say providers of APIs, when they want to update their catalog, they don't have to do extra work. So we could leverage, actually eat our own dog food and put APIs in our catalog so that when they create their, releases, they can leverage an API to actually automatically update the catalog. That's one of the things we're looking at. We're looking at alerting. We're looking at a lot of modern features you see in a lot of these modern websites to make it a lot easier and more productive and usable. Right now, we see a lot of one and done where you just enter your item in the catalog and it never gets updated. So things like that is what we're trying to solve, and that's coming up. We're actually meeting with them next Wednesday as our third meeting with them. As far as basically our next item, it's a Strategic API Task Force Summit. And again, these next three were thought of prior to the SecDef memo and the DOJ and all that stuff where they killed all our travel funding. So we still have them on our TBD, we have them as TBD, but we're still trying to figure out how we're going to do them because we had envisioned them all being in person. But there's another company, they're over in that corner of the exhibit hall, and they're called, I think it's like Hackabox or something like that, but they're the ones we're talking to about this hackathon. They're supporting DAU, I believe, and we're talking to them about supporting our hackathon. We've talked to them a couple times, and that's another item we're looking at putting into our planned activities. And finally, we're going to be using our R&E sandbox I mentioned earlier to create an API testbed, and we're going to be leveraging our work that we've done. And I've got it here. So basically the API experimental testbed is going to be derived from work we've done previously with MITRE and others to support something called the Reliability C2 bus. So what that is basically like a real-time weapons systems bus. And we're kind of prototyping that, and MITRE's been doing that previously. We're taking that, and they've added now so you can make the protocols extensible, where previously it was hard-coded to a certain protocol they picked. So now we can basically plug and play different protocols, and we can create basically metrics to see which one's the fastest or best. We think what's going to happen is it's not going to be one because it's faster. It's going to be one because there's several features that you're going to find that it supports better than the others, and that's the one you want for your specific needs. And it's not going to be, we think it's going to be people coming in. They're each going to have unique needs. We know how the DoD works. And so one person's going to want, solution A, one's going to want solution B, and that's what we're trying to look at.
Yeah, and I think to expand on that, one of the things we want to be able to do initially is to be able to answer questions about performance given a certain sort of environment or network topology, right? So when somebody says, I need an API that can have this or support this kind of throughput, or I have this security environment, how does that work? Well, the idea behind the testbed is, well, let's try, let's play with it, let's see if we can solve that problem. We did have within the department, there's a software factory coalition, and at one of the annual meetings, we had some folks come up to us from Transcom and said, well, we have a unique problem, and they sat down and explained their particular problem, and we worked with them to sort of help define a solution that gets around their particular operational problem. So again, in DoD, right, we have some unique problems. You can get around them, we just have to talk about it. And so part of what we do, or a lot of what we do, is connect people across the department who actually found people who've solved problems, who found vendors who understand the problem, and we kind of get those people together to talk and make progress. So it's worked out really well, and this bus environment is something we want to extend beyond kind of the basic state it's in. it just spins up, use Kubernetes, spins up a bunch of agents, and it does work, and you can measure it's fully, use Grafana, it's fully instrumented, so you can kind of see what's going on. And help to make informed decisions about the kind of API sort of laydown that you want.
Sure, yeah. Transcom came in with a bunch of guys, and they came to our talk, and they asked questions about it. And next thing you know, we locked ourselves in a room for 2 hours with 5 whiteboards, and we started solutioning with them. And they took it back. After a few months, they called us and said they had solved the problem. I don't think it was anything we solved that day that ultimately solved their problem, but it definitely got them going in the right direction. So we're happy about that. So let's see. So, and finally, we're starting to close out here. We're going to continue to solidify the program guidance and best practices for APIs. That's one of our big goals. And that's not only R&E, but we're going to do that with ANS. We're partners with ANS on this and working closely with them. And we believe that APIs are essential to the success of DoD for delivering new and innovative capabilities to the warfighter. And one of the things we're going to be looking at soon is the edge computing and APIs at the edge. That's another item on our hit list for new work that we're doing on MVCRs. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Alan. Go ahead, Alan.
Thanks. So just kind of to touch on what we're doing, obviously APIs are critical. They've been critical in industry for a long time. So we're, I think, slowly starting to get on board and then work through some of the challenges that DoD has with implementing them. Some of it's going to be easier, some of it's going to be harder, but it'll be necessary to be able to really take advantage of industry's deployment of software and the pace with which industry can release software updates, and also taking advantage of security, right? There's been a lot of talk about zero trust here. These are all things that we need to build in. I think it'll also help us with our merging of legacy applications, because we have a lot of legacy software. I heard some description of how many systems out there are still running in COBOL or Ada. I may look old, but I never coded in COBOL. I had standards. I'm sorry. But I had coded in Ada, so I will admit to that. We've been really working, and as I said, part of our focus is to help to solve problems that individual groups may have, and either we can help solve them by making the connections, by talking through the problem, or helping to work out, sort of doing some prototyping and help define solutions that way. So that's a lot of what our activity is about. And so we have a small team, but we're very enthusiastic. And so we always end these by saying, anybody who's interested in joining the API working group, we're happy to have them join. I know we work very closely with ANS and CIO, and there's a lot of talk now in terms of software modernization. Where do we go next with API? Beyond sort of guidance and some of the initial prototyping, how do we move some of these initiatives forward? Going 3 to 5 years out. Where do we see ourselves and how much progress we've made? So, with that, I think we are. It's the last click. So we're happy to take questions. We just ask that whoever's asking, please use the microphone.
Hi. In your survey out there of what's available, you determined that there was really no, there's a lot of API platforms already available. So you determined nothing was available that met your needs for the real-time weapon system stuff? I was kind of surprised to hear that you turned to MITRE to do that versus going to a vendor.
Yeah, I think basically when we were looking for AI APIs, and there was nothing available that we could find that exposed the AI through the API. There were those, chat prompts where you go to a web interface and you say, how do I do this, or how do I convert Ada to COBOL or whatever, and it might help you. But we didn't see any way that we could say take a COBOL program and then dice it up and feed it to the AI and get back the Python, say, from a COBOL. Say if we prompt it with COBOL, say give us Python. and get it back piece by piece or module by module. We didn't see anything like that, and that's kind of the level we wanted to go. And I know Nipper GPT, we just met with them last week or 2 weeks ago, and they said they're working on COBOL right now, converting COBOL to some other language. I don't know what it was, but it was something modern. And we're going to be following them, and we're working very closely with the CDAO, and we're letting them kind of lead that area. So,
did you find a common approach by vendors out there right now that they're employing, like ETL? I see a lot of ETL out there right now, but as you see, I see some real-time stuff as well. So I was just kind of wondering.
So part of this is maybe less technology and more adoption, right? And how you get people to adopt. As I said, there are a lot of technologies that could be adopted, right? But there are communities that have a hard time adopting them, right? So particularly the weapons system community, there's an effort within the acquisition and sustainment group that's called Weapons Ignite, and they're looking at rapid software development for weapons. But historically, weapons are that's a different focus, right? And saying I'm going to have an API to your weapons system is like, why would I do that, right? I press the button, it explodes. I mean, that's overly simplistic, but there are elements of that. So I think we're working through. It's not, again, I've told ANS this, that they have the hard problem. How do you buy it and pay for it, right? Our problem is just helping to find and work through some of the technology barriers that exist. There's plenty of examples in industry of things that do this, but they may or may not meet needs, or we may have to work within a department to adjust the view of requirements, right? Because we've all been there, right? I've worked on things where there's this one requirement, and I could have a commercial solution, but I have this one requirement, and you can't meet it. So now we're going to let a contract, and it'll take twice as long and cost twice as much. And I'm not exaggerating. I've been through that, and it's like, please don't do this, but we have to do it.
But the word on Monday was commercial first.
It is. That's why we love the pathway memo, which is that helps us kind of break through that, right? And that becomes the battle cry. So we've been, a lot of us talked about it. I can tell you, I developed software in the department for a long time before I came back into the government. And it would pain me to do some of the things I had to do, which was to dumb down interfaces, right? And to dumb all kinds of stuff down. I was paid money to remove capability. That just still makes me cry. Right, so I think this is going to drive us to sort of, okay, how can we do it faster? Right? If you make the priority, the boss has given us a command, move out. All right, how do we do that? And so I think it's going to help exactly what you said. Now we'll have to figure out how to make those things work in other ways, right?
Yeah, the other problem is that, say we want to go with Grok AI. It's $20, what is it, like $20 a month. I'm going to go to Alan and say, okay, I need $20 a month. And they're going to laugh at me. It's going to take them 6 months to a year to figure out how to fund it. And then by the time they fund it, it's going to be something else I need. You know what I mean? So, yeah, so DOD really needs to get adjusted for that as well.
There's these acquisition reform memos and executive orders that will help us kind of move faster and kind of, over the years, I've worked with people in the government who were very motivated, and they were willing to take the slings and arrows, and they could make things happen. So the tools are there. You just have to have the will to do them. And I'm not going to say any more because I think this is being recorded.
Yeah. So, okay.
I can get it there we go. Thanks, Alan and Tim, for the presentation. So I often support the test community. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, what does APIs do for testing? Does it increase the amount of testing we need to perform? Tim, you talked a little bit about chaos engineering from a cybersecurity testing perspective. What do we need to do different? And what do programs need to do to plan for potential increased testing that are driven by APIs?
One of the things we're looking at right now in our documentation, we've captured this in the MVCR2, is the personas. And so what happens is when you have APIs and you're the provider, you have these personas that you provide them for, and those personas are going to consume the API and they're going to use them in a certain way. We recently started consuming the Dave API, which is the basically ANS's data on all the programs. And we had like 12 users or 12 systems that were consuming it years ahead of us. We got there. Day one, we broke it. it was our persona that we were using. They had never seen anything like it before, using the way we were using it. And it basically found a lot of issues within their API that was now matured, been up and running 5 years, yet they had all these bugs in it they didn't know about. So yeah, testing is really important. So.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about, again, what if you're successful, right? It means like DOL found, you're going to have twice the load on day one, and then it's just going to get worse, and then you're going to be attacked, right? I remember the OPM breach, right? And you remember the sort of the IRS transcription attack, right? Where basically they just brute forced hundreds of thousands of requests, and occasionally the API got crossed up and sent them somebody's tax return. A lot of the software, right, we have to aggressively test it, right? So because they're always going to be present. When we deployed in the good old bad old days a point-to-point API, well, probably the link itself was secured enough. It wasn't discoverable, right? It was some custom protocol that was at the binary level, so it was going to be really hard to penetrate it. You could deny it maybe, but it would be hard to penetrate it without a lot of work. Whereas APIs, you're publishing them so that they are exposed, they're consumable, discoverable, et cetera. So part of what you have to do is make sure that you have the right kind of sort of infrastructure to protect it, to deploy it. But the good thing is you can do that testing continuously, right? And you can monitor utilization continuously. Industry does that. I've talked to people in the financial industry, right, where they're under like brutal attack every second. So they've figured out some of that. So I think those are the things that we have to understand. And then how does that lay against our security environment? Because financial industry has one set of rules, right? But they've never seen anything like multiple SAPs, right, at multiple levels of security from CY all the way to SCI and different read-ins. I mean, that makes what we're doing a challenge, right? So we have to figure out how these things can be done within that environment, because there are legitimate security constraints that we're going to have. How do you manage that? How do you make APIs work in that environment? But it could benefit by publishing at multiple levels of APIs, right? So you can consume a CUI and with your credential, and then ultimately, if you get to a point where you've got sort of multiple levels on a single wire, right, managing that. There's a lot that has to happen before that, but I think APIs will enable that. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm not a programmer, but I heard some keywords, Kubernetes and Python. And so I'm just asking, how do you bring in the younger generation that may not have that experience, but has the skill set to do what you all are trying to do? Do you have programs or ways to bring them in straight out of college?
Yeah, we do. Well, so the department is working on a lot of that. One was the DCTC, the Defense Civilian Training Corps. It's kind of an ROTC equivalent, where for certain technical disciplines, they'll pay for college, and then you have a commitment to come serve the government for some number of years. And that's in digital technology skills, right? Data science and software engineering. So there's a lot of work there. There are groups in DoD and IC and other places that are actually going now into schools. And there's a lot of sponsorship for mentoring, so that folks who are contractors or government folks can go into schools and sort of be mentors and support that. So there's that kind of engagement. And increasingly what we're seeing in the talent management area is there's targeting of sort of information and sort of recruitment ads that are specific to those age groups. But it's amazing. I think when you talk about high schoolers, I think they probably know more, right, than of some of that, because they're not encumbered by the past, right? And so they're eager, and they're kind of jumping in right at, okay, how do I manage this cluster environment in a cloud environment? Well, somebody who's been in a department for 20 years, you're probably dealing with older code, older systems. I think the challenge for the department a little bit is going to be how when on day one they're not required to leave their technology in their car before they go into the building, right? That's been an issue, right? Or at least you have what's in the building is as good as what you have to leave in your car.
Right. Thank you.
Did I answer your question, ma'am?
You did. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think the hackathon, too, is really something they kind of gets their attention. And you see the Ukraine, when they first started the war, with the Ukraine, it was the college kids that had just graduated that took the drones, and they were able to update them overnight. They were able to take these weapons systems and do things with them that we had never envisioned that you could rapidly, iterate so quickly. So I think, my kid just graduated college last year, and he wants to go into drones and all that stuff. And so I think there are some people out there that are kind of looking towards, that future. But, as far as AI and APIs and things like that, I think there's also a group that really is interested in that too. But I think it's going to take a while for the curriculum to catch up at the college level and whatnot. Yep.
So one of the things there was a hackathon, I think it was about a year and a half ago, where they were trying to accomplish something, and they found that they couldn't get the people data. So while they were waiting to try and get access to data, they went out on the web and they did scraping, and they found basically most of what they wanted in the open, which I think is great. I mean, sometimes you don't want it to be too familiar. You want them to come in with that fresh perspective and ask why or how can I or whatever. So I think that's super valuable. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll hang out here for a few minutes if anybody wants to talk. Otherwise, thanks for coming out early in the morning. It probably helped that we're right next to the coffee. So.
It's bait. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you very much.